Within 24 hours of being terminated for violating hospital transport policy, emergency room nurse Maria Santos received a call from the White House. She was being awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The engine of Maria Santos's 2014 Honda Civic coughed like an old man with a 3-pack-a-day habit as she pulled into the hospital parking garage at 10:47 p.m. She patted the dashboard affectionately, whispering her usual prayer, "Just get me through another shift, girl." The car responded with a wheeze that didn't sound promising, but it would have to do. At 26, Maria had learned to make do with a lot of things. She grabbed her faded purple scrubs from the passenger seat and headed toward the employee entrance of Mercy General Hospital. The night air carried the familiar smell of the city, exhaust fumes mixed with the aroma from the taco truck that parked outside the ER entrance every evening. Maria had grown up 20 miles outside the city in a trailer park where the air smelled like dust and broken dreams. The city smells were better, even if they weren't exactly fresh. The elevator creaked as it carried her to the 4th floor. Maria checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. Brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup except for lip balm, dark circles under her eyes that had become permanent fixtures since nursing school. She looked tired, but then again, everyone in healthcare looked tired these days. "Evening sunshine," called Jake, one of the orderlies, as Maria walked through the ER doors. "Ready for another glamorous Friday night in paradise?" Maria smiled despite herself. Jake had been working at Mercy General for 15 years and somehow maintained his sense of humor despite seeing humanity at its worst every single night. "You know me, Jake. Living the dream." The emergency department buzzed with its typical Friday evening energy. 3 beds were already occupied, a college student who'd had too much to drink and taken a tumble down some stairs, an elderly woman clutching her chest and speaking rapid Spanish to her worried daughter, and a construction worker with what looked like a badly mangled hand wrapped in a blood-soaked towel. Maria made her way to the nurses' station, where she found Dr. Chen reviewing charts with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. Dr. Chen was 42, had been working emergency medicine for 12 years, and took the protocols and procedures of hospital life as seriously as sacred law. She was also one of the best emergency physicians Maria had ever worked with. "Santos," Dr. Chen said without looking up, "Trauma Bay 2 needs attention. Motor vehicle accident coming in 15 minutes. And Bed 7's labs came back. Looks like we'll need to admit for observation." "Got it." Maria grabbed her stethoscope from her locker and began her routine check of supplies. After 3 years of night shifts in the ER, she could do the inventory in her sleep. Gauze, tape, IV bags, medications, defibrillator pads, intubation equipment. Everything in its place, everything ready for whatever came through those doors. She thought about her mother, probably just getting home from her second job, cleaning office buildings downtown. Elena Santos worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week, and still barely made enough to cover the rent on their old trailer. Maria sent home $300 every month, which meant she lived on ramen noodles and hope, but it was worth it to know her mother could afford her blood pressure medication. The construction worker turned out to have 3 broken fingers and a nasty laceration that required 12 stitches. Maria cleaned and dressed the wound while he told her about his 2 daughters, both in high school, both smarter than he'd ever been. "They're going to college," he said with pride that made his pain seem secondary. "First ones in our family." By 2:30 a.m., the controlled chaos had settled into a manageable rhythm. The drunk college student had sobered up enough to call his roommate for a ride home. The elderly woman's EKG showed no signs of a heart attack, likely anxiety brought on by stress about her grandson's deployment to Afghanistan. The construction worker had been discharged with instructions to follow up with his primary doctor and a prescription for pain medication he probably couldn't afford to fill. Maria was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay 3 when she heard Jake's voice over the intercom. "All staff, we've got incoming. 8-year-old male, severe respiratory distress, ETA 2 minutes." She quickly finished organizing the supply cabinet and moved toward the ambulance bay. Through the glass doors, she could see the city beyond the hospital grounds. Friday night traffic moved in rivers of red and white lights, people heading home from work or out for evening entertainment, everyone going about their normal lives. Maria had always found something comforting about the view, the reminder that beyond these walls, life continued in all its messy, beautiful, ordinary complexity. That was when every light in the hospital flickered once, twice, and then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the ER in an eerie red glow that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. Maria heard the distant hum of generators struggling to life, but she knew they only powered critical areas, the ICU, the operating rooms, the NICU. The General Emergency Department would have to make do with backup battery power that would last maybe 6 hours if they were lucky. "What the hell?" Jake's voice echoed from the nurse's station. Dr. Chen was already moving, her training taking over. "Everyone stay calm. Maria, check the monitoring equipment. Jake, I need you to assess which systems are still functional." Maria moved quickly from bed to bed, testing the vital signs monitors, the defibrillator, the ventilator they kept for emergencies. Most of the equipment was working, drawing power from the hospital's backup systems, but she could hear the strain in the generator's hum. This wasn't a planned power outage. Through the windows, Maria could see that the entire city had gone dark. Not just dark, completely black, as if someone had thrown a switch and turned off civilization itself. No streetlights, no traffic signals, no lights in any of the buildings visible from the hospital. Even the digital billboards that usually blazed with advertisements had gone silent. "Dr. Chen," called Susan, the receptionist, her voice tight with concern. "I'm getting calls from all over the city. Looks like the entire grid is down. Something about a massive transformer explosion at the main power station." Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. A city-wide blackout meant ambulances couldn't navigate safely. GPS systems would be down. Traffic lights were dead, which meant every intersection was now a potential disaster zone. And somewhere out there, people were having heart attacks, strokes, accidents, and babies, all the medical emergencies that didn't pause for infrastructure failures. The ambulance that had been en route arrived with sirens wailing, its own battery-powered lights cutting through the darkness. Maria watched through the window as the EMTs unloaded their patient. She could see it was a child, small and still, oxygen mask covering most of his face. The doors burst open and the EMTs rushed in. 8-year-old male, Tommy Martinez, severe asthma attack, shouted the lead paramedic, a woman Maria recognized from dozens of previous calls. Started about an hour ago. Inhaler's empty. He's barely maintaining oxygen saturation. Dr. Chen took control immediately. Trauma Bay 1. What's his SATA? 87 and dropping. We've been bagging him for the last 10 minutes. Behind the EMTs came a man in his 30s, wearing a janitor's uniform and an expression of absolute terror. This had to be the father. Maria had seen that look before, the face of a parent watching their child fight for life and feeling completely powerless to help. "Sir, you'll need to wait outside," Dr. Chen said gently but firmly. "Please," the man said, his voice breaking. "He's all I got. His mama died 2 years ago. It's just us. Please don't let him." He couldn't finish the sentence. Maria caught his arm. "What's your name?" "Diego. Diego Martinez. This is Tommy. He's 8. He's never had an attack this bad before." Diego's hands shook as he spoke. The power went out, and he got scared, started having trouble breathing, and then it just got worse and worse. I gave him his inhaler, but nothing happened. "We're going to take good care of him," Maria said, meaning every word. She led Diego to the family waiting area, such as it was in the dim emergency lighting. "I'll come update you as soon as I can." In Trauma Bay 1, Tommy Martinez lay unconscious on the gurney, his small chest rising and falling with obvious difficulty despite the oxygen mask. Dr. Chen listened to his lungs with her stethoscope, her face grim. Severe bronchospasm. He's not moving air. We need to intubate now. She looked up at Maria. Get me a size 4.5 tube and prep the albuterol for nebulizer treatment once we get him stable. Maria moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was racing. She'd seen plenty of asthma attacks, and this one was bad, the kind that could be fatal if not treated quickly and aggressively. Tommy needed immediate intensive care, the kind that required a pediatric ICU with specialized equipment and staff. Dr. Chen, she said quietly, shouldn't we transfer him to Children's Hospital? They've got the pediatric intensive care unit. Dr. Chen paused in her preparations. Children's Hospital was 12 miles away through the heart of the city. On a normal night, the ambulance could make the trip in 20 minutes. But this wasn't a normal night. Maria, look outside. The entire city is dark. Ambulances can't navigate without GPS, and every intersection is a disaster waiting to happen without traffic lights. Our transport vehicles are either out on calls or stuck in the chaos. As if to emphasize her point, they heard the distant sound of sirens and car horns, the symphony of a city whose transportation infrastructure had suddenly failed. Through the window, Maria could see the faint glow of car accidents in several directions, hazard lights blinking like distress signals. Tommy's oxygen saturation dropped to 85. We'll have to manage him here, Dr. Chen decided. We can stabilize him, keep him on continuous nebulizer treatments and oxygen support until the power comes back and we can arrange transport. But Maria knew with the instinct that came from 3 years of emergency nursing that Tommy didn't have hours to wait. His color was getting worse despite the oxygen, and she could see the telltale signs of a child whose respiratory system was shutting down. He needed pediatric intensive care, and he needed it now. That was when she made the decision that would change everything. Dr. Chen, Maria said, her voice steadier than she felt, I can drive him. Dr. Chen looked up from adjusting Tommy's oxygen flow. What? To Children's Hospital. I can drive him in my car. It's running. I know the city streets, and I can navigate without GPS. The silence in Trauma Bay 1 was deafening, except for the sound of Tommy's labored breathing and the beep of the monitor showing his dropping oxygen levels. Absolutely not. Dr. Chen's voice was firm. Maria, you know hospital policy. Staff cannot transport patients in personal vehicles. The liability issues alone. His SATs are down to 83, Maria interrupted, pointing at the monitor. We can manage this here. Can we? Maria looked directly at Dr. Chen. You know what this looks like. This isn't just a severe asthma attack. This is status asthmaticus. He needs PICU-level care, pediatric pulmonologist, maybe even ECMO if he doesn't respond to treatment. We both know we're not equipped for that here. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, and Maria could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. The doctor in her knew Maria was right. Tommy needed specialized care they couldn't provide. But the administrator in her, the part that had been shaped by years of hospital bureaucracy and liability concerns, knew that what Maria was suggesting was completely against protocol. Even if I wanted to allow it, which I don't, it's against hospital policy for good reason. Your car isn't equipped with proper medical equipment. You're not trained as a transport paramedic. If something happens during transport, something's going to happen if we don't transport him, Maria said quietly. Look at him, Dr. Chen. Really look at him. Tommy's lips were beginning to show a blue tinge despite the oxygen mask. His small hands were clenched into fists, and even unconscious, his body was fighting for every breath. The monitors showed his heart rate climbing as his body tried to compensate for the lack of oxygen. Maria thought about Diego Martinez, sitting in the waiting area, probably praying to every saint he could remember. She thought about her own mother, working double shifts to keep their family afloat, and how she would feel if Maria was lying on this gurney. She thought about all the protocols and procedures that made perfect sense in a world where ambulances could navigate city streets and hospitals had full power and emergency systems worked the way they were supposed to. But this wasn't that world. Tonight, all the rules had changed. I can take the portable oxygen tank, she said. and the portable monitor. I'll have his father monitor his breathing and vitals during transport. My car is small, but it's reliable, and I can get him there faster than waiting for the power to come back or for an ambulance to make it through this chaos. Maria! Dr. Chen's voice held a warning. If you take a patient out of this hospital in your personal vehicle without authorization, you'll be terminated immediately. The hospital's insurance won't cover any complications that arise from unauthorized transport. Your nursing license could be at risk. And if I don't, Tommy Martinez could die. The words hung in the air between them. Maria could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the antiseptic and fear that permeated every emergency room, could feel the weight of a decision that would define not just Tommy's future, but her own. Tommy's oxygen saturation dropped to 81. Maria didn't think about her job, or her nursing license, or hospital policy. She thought about an 8-year-old boy whose mother was already dead, whose father was sitting in a darkened waiting room, believing that the people in white coats could fix anything. She thought about the oath she'd taken as a nurse, about doing no harm and advocating for her patients above all else. She grabbed the portable oxygen tank from its mount on the wall. "Maria, don't you dare!" But Maria was already moving, disconnecting Tommy from the wall-mounted systems and transferring him to the portable equipment. The oxygen tank was heavy, but she'd carried heavier things. The portable monitor would track his vital signs during transport. "I need someone to help me get him to my car," she called out. Jake appeared in the doorway. "What's happening?" "I'm transporting this patient to Children's Hospital," Maria said, not looking at Dr. Chen. "I need help getting him to the parking garage." "Maria," Dr. Chen said, her voice rising, "if you walk out of this hospital with that patient, you're fired. Do you understand me? Fired. I'll have to report this to administration, to the state nursing board, to—" "I understand," Maria said quietly. She looked at Tommy, this small boy who reminded her of her nephew back home, who deserved every chance at growing up and playing soccer and arguing with his father about homework and all the ordinary miracles of childhood. Jake stepped forward. "What do you need me to do?" Dr. Chen stared at both of them. "This is insane. You're both risking your careers for a kid who's going to die if we don't do something," Maria finished. "Jake, can you help me get the gurney to the elevator?" As they moved Tommy out of Trauma Bay 1, Maria heard Dr. Chen behind them. "This is going in your file, Santos. This is going in your permanent record." Maria didn't look back. The parking garage had never seemed so far away. Maria pushed the gurney with Jake's help. The portable oxygen tank balanced precariously on the foot of the bed, the monitor showing Tommy's vitals in glowing numbers that seemed too bright in the dim emergency lighting. Tommy's father, Diego, walked beside them, one hand on his son's arm, murmuring in Spanish. Prayers, Maria thought, or maybe just the kind of words fathers say to their children when they don't know what else to do. "My car's on level 3, Maria said as they reached the elevator. "It's not much, but it'll get us there." The elevator ride felt like it lasted forever. Tommy's breathing seemed more labored with each floor they descended, and Maria found herself silently bargaining with whatever forces controlled the universe. "Let me get him to Children's Hospital alive, and I'll accept whatever consequences come after." Her Honda Civic looked even more pathetic than usual under the garage's emergency lighting. The back seat was cluttered with nursing textbooks, empty coffee cups, and a jacket she'd been meaning to take to the dry cleaner for 3 months. Jake helped her clear space while Diego climbed into the front passenger seat, never taking his eyes off his son. Getting Tommy and the oxygen tank safely into the back seat required more creativity than Maria had expected. The tank barely fit, and she had to position it carefully to ensure the tubing would reach Tommy's oxygen mask throughout the journey. The portable monitor went on the floor, its display casting an eerie blue glow throughout the car's interior. "Diego," Maria said as she started the engine, grateful when it turned over on the first try, "I need you to watch Tommy's breathing during the drive. If it changes, if the numbers on that monitor change significantly, you tell me immediately. Can you do that?" Diego nodded, his face set with the determination of a man who finally had something concrete to do to help his son. "I can do that." Maria's phone showed 3:17 a.m. as she backed out of the parking space. She'd made the drive to Children's Hospital dozens of times during her nursing school clinical rotations, but never in complete darkness, never with the city's entire infrastructure down, and certainly never with a critically ill child in her back seat. The first challenge came before they'd even left the hospital parking lot. The traffic light at the intersection of Hospital Drive and Main Street was completely dark, and cars from all four directions were creeping forward tentatively, none sure who had the right of way. Maria watched a near collision as two vehicles almost merged into the same space, their drivers using hand signals and hazard lights to communicate. She rolled down her window and used her phone's flashlight to signal the other drivers, waving them through the intersection until it was her turn. The Honda's engine temperature gauge was already climbing higher than usual, not a good sign for a 12-mile journey through stop-and-go traffic. "How's he doing back there?" she asked Diego as they finally cleared the intersection. "His breathing looks the same. The numbers on the machine, it says 82. Better than when they'd left the hospital, but not good enough." Maria pressed a little harder on the accelerator. The city looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. Without streetlights, the only illumination came from car headlights and the occasional glow of a building's emergency generator. People wandered the sidewalks using their phones as flashlights, some trying to direct traffic at major intersections, others simply trying to navigate their way home in the unfamiliar darkness. At 4th and Broadway, Maria encountered her first major obstacle, a 3-car collision that completely blocked the eastbound lanes. She could see people standing around the accident scene, using their phones to provide light while they exchanged insurance information. One car had smoke rising from its crumpled hood. Maria pulled into the westbound lanes, driving against traffic while other drivers did the same thing. It was controlled chaos, everyone making up the rules as they went along, united by the common goal of getting somewhere safely. "Señora," Diego said, his voice tight. "The number's changed. It says 79 now." Maria's heart rate spiked. Tommy's oxygen saturation was dropping again. She needed to get him to Children's Hospital fast, but the traffic was getting worse as they approached downtown. Every intersection was a negotiation, every mile a test of patience they didn't have. The Honda's temperature gauge crept into the red zone as they sat in traffic near City Hall. Steam began rising from under the hood, visible in the glow of their headlights. Maria's reliable car was finally giving up, pushed beyond its limits on a night when she needed it most. "Come on, girl," she whispered, patting the dashboard. "Just a few more miles." At 7th and Market, they encountered a group of firefighters who had set up a makeshift traffic control point, using flares and flashlights to direct vehicles through the intersection. One of them, a woman about Maria's age, approached the driver's side window. "Where are you folks headed?" the firefighter asked. "Children's Hospital," Maria said. "Medical emergency." The firefighter looked into the back seat, saw Tommy with his oxygen mask and the portable monitor, and her expression immediately became all business. "Follow me," she said, and began jogging ahead of the Honda, using her flashlight to clear a path through the stalled traffic. They made it through downtown with the firefighters' help, but as they entered the residential neighborhoods between downtown and Children's Hospital, they were on their own again. The Honda's engine was making concerning noises now, rattling and wheezing like it was fighting for every revolution. "The numbers are 78, Diego reported, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 more miles to go." Maria could see the glow of Children's Hospital in the distance. They had more generators than Mercy General, so their lights were still on. But the Honda was clearly dying, steam now pouring from under the hood, the temperature gauge buried deep in the red zone. 1 mile to go. The engine began knocking, a metallic sound that Maria knew meant serious internal damage. She pressed the accelerator anyway, coaxing every last bit of life from her faithful car. half a mile. They could see the hospital clearly now, its lit windows like a beacon in the darkness. But the Honda was shuddering with each revolution, and Maria could smell burning oil. The car died completely just as Maria turned into the Children's Hospital parking lot. The engine simply stopped, all the dashboard lights went dark, and they coasted to a stop about 50 yards from the emergency entrance on momentum alone. "Diego, help me get Tommy out," Maria said, already opening her door. They worked together to lift Tommy from the back seat, Maria managing the oxygen tank while Diego cradled his son. The portable monitor, still showing Tommy's vital signs, balanced precariously in Diego's free hand as they hurried toward the emergency entrance. The automatic doors of Children's Hospital opened with a whoosh of air conditioning and bright light. After hours in the darkened city, the fully lit hospital felt like arriving on another planet. Maria's eyes needed a moment to adjust as she called out, "I need help here, 8-year-old in respiratory distress." The pediatric emergency team responded immediately. Within minutes, Tommy was on a proper hospital gurney, surrounded by doctors and nurses who specialized in saving children's lives. Maria transferred care to the attending physician, a woman who looked like she'd been working for days straight, but whose hands were perfectly steady as she examined Tommy. "Status asthmaticus," the doctor confirmed after listening to Tommy's lungs. "We'll need to get him to PICU immediately. Good call bringing him here. This is exactly the kind of case that needs specialized pediatric care." As the medical team wheeled Tommy toward the elevators, Diego turned to Maria with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for saving my son." Maria watched them disappear behind the elevator doors, Tommy surrounded by the kind of medical team that could give him everything he needed to recover. Her Honda Civic sat dead in the parking lot, steam still rising from its hood like incense. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Dr. Chen and hospital administration. She had saved Tommy Martinez's life, and in exactly 18 hours and 23 minutes, she would lose her job because of it. Maria's phone started ringing before she'd even made it home from Children's Hospital. The Uber driver, a college student who'd been trapped at the library when the power went out, had offered to give her a ride back to her apartment for $20 cash. As they drove through the slowly lightening city, power crews were already working to restore electricity to critical areas. Maria watched the steady stream of calls coming in. Dr. Chen, hospital administration, Dr. Chen again, the director of nursing, someone from human resources whose name she didn't recognize. She turned the phone off. Her apartment felt smaller than usual when she finally walked through the door at 6:30 a.m. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, furniture that had come from garage sales, and the kindness of previous tenants who'd left things behind. The power was back on in her neighborhood. But Maria sat in the dark anyway, too tired and too overwhelmed to deal with electric lights. She'd done the right thing. She knew that with absolute certainty. Tommy Martinez was alive because she'd made the choice to act when the systems everyone relied on had failed. But knowing she'd done the right thing didn't make what was coming next any easier. Her phone buzzed with a text message when she turned it back on an hour later. "Dr. Chen, report to my office at 2 p.m. Bring union representative if you have one." Maria didn't have a union representative. She'd never thought she'd need one. The shower helped a little, washing away the smell of her dead car and the hospital and the fear that had been her constant companion for the past 8 hours. But when she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, she saw a woman whose life was about to change dramatically and not necessarily for the better. She tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Tommy's face, heard Diego's voice saying, "Thank you for saving my son." It was worth it, she told herself. Whatever happened next, it was worth it. At 1:45 p.m., Maria walked into Mercy General Hospital for what she suspected might be the last time as an employee. The day shift was in full swing, and the ER hummed with its usual controlled chaos. Several of her colleagues nodded as she passed, but their expressions were carefully neutral. Word had gotten around. Dr. Chen's office was a cramped space on the third floor that managed to feel both clinical and cluttered. Medical journals sat in neat stacks next to patient files, and the walls were covered with certificates and diplomas that testified to Dr. Chen's impressive medical credentials. Maria had been in this office exactly twice before, once when she was hired and once when she'd been commended for her quick thinking during a multi-vehicle accident that had brought 12 trauma victims to their ER in one night. Dr. Chen wasn't alone. Margaret Walsh from Human Resources sat in the corner, her laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard like a court stenographer preparing to record an execution. The director of nursing, Patricia Hoffman, occupied the chair that Maria had sat in during her job interview 3 years ago. "Have a seat, Maria," Dr. Chen said, her voice professional but not unkind. Maria sat. "I think we all know why we're here," Patricia Hoffman began. She was a woman in her 50s who'd been in hospital administration for 20 years and had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from dealing with difficult situations day after day. "Maria, your actions last night were a clear violation of hospital policy regarding patient transport." "I understand that," Maria said quietly. "The policy exists for very good reasons," Margaret Walsh added, reading from her laptop screen. "Liability concerns, insurance requirements, patient safety protocols." "Patient safety?" Maria looked up sharply. "Tommy Martinez is alive because I transported him to Children's Hospital. How is that not patient safety?" "That's not the point," Patricia Hoffman said. "The point is that you used your personal vehicle to transport a patient without authorization, in violation of clearly established hospital procedures. You put the hospital at enormous legal risk." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Maria, I want you to know that personally I admire what you did. That child needed specialized care, and your quick thinking probably saved his life. But I also can't ignore the fact that you directly violated hospital policy after I specifically told you not to. Would you rather I had let him die?" The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret Walsh cleared her throat. "The hospital's insurance company has been contacted about this incident. They're very concerned about the precedent this sets. If we allow staff to transport patients in personal vehicles, what happens when someone gets hurt during transport? What happens when a patient dies in an unauthorized vehicle? The liability exposure is enormous." "What about our liability if patients die because we refuse to help them when our systems fail?" Maria asked. "That's not relevant to this discussion," Patricia Hoffman said firmly. "What's relevant is that you knowingly violated hospital policy and put both the institution and the patient at risk." Dr. Chen opened a file folder on her desk. "Maria, your employment with Mercy General Hospital is terminated, effective immediately. You'll be escorted out of the building after this meeting. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file." Maria had known this was coming, but hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow. 3 years of night shifts, 3 years of saving lives and comforting families and working overtime when they were short-staffed. Gone. "There's more," Margaret Walsh said, still typing on her laptop. "The incident will be reported to the State Nursing Board for review. While we won't recommend that your license be revoked, the board will need to determine if your actions constitute professional misconduct." Professional misconduct. Maria repeated the words slowly. "For saving a child's life." "For violating established safety protocols," Patricia Hoffman corrected. "Maria, I know this is difficult, but the rules exist for everyone's protection. We can't make exceptions, even for well-intentioned actions." "What about Tommy Martinez?" Maria asked. "Have you checked on how he's doing?" Dr. Chen consulted her notes. "I spoke with the attending physician at Children's Hospital this morning. Tommy is stable and responding well to treatment. He'll make a full recovery." She paused. "They confirmed that he needed the level of specialized care they could provide. We probably couldn't have managed his case as effectively here." So I was right. That's not the point. Maria stood up. She was tired of hearing what the point was according to people who hadn't been in that trauma bay, watching an 8-year-old boy struggle for breath while the entire city's infrastructure collapsed around them. "Is there anything else?" she asked. Margaret Walsh handed her a manila envelope. "Your termination paperwork, information about Cobra Health Insurance continuation, and the contact information for the nursing board investigator who'll be handling your case." Maria took the envelope without looking at it. "For what it's worth," Dr. Chen said as Maria reached the door, "I think you're a good nurse. I hope this works out for you." Maria nodded but didn't trust herself to speak. She walked out of the office, down the elevator, through the ER where she'd spent 3 years of her life, and out into the afternoon sunshine. A security guard she'd never seen before escorted her to the parking lot, where her dead Honda Civic still sat as a reminder of everything that had happened. She called the same Uber driver who'd brought her home that morning. The local news picked up the story that evening. Maria watched from her couch as a perfectly coiffed reporter stood outside Mercy General Hospital and explained how a nurse had been fired for using her personal vehicle to transport a patient during the previous night's citywide blackout. The hospital administration had released a statement emphasizing the importance of following established safety protocols, even during emergency situations. The reporter interviewed Dr. Chen, who looked uncomfortable on camera, as she explained that patient safety required adherence to proper procedures. "We can't have medical staff making individual decisions about patient transport," Dr. Chen said. "There are protocols in place for good reasons." Then the reporter interviewed Maria, having tracked her down through public records and social media. Maria had tried to decline, but the reporter had been persistent, and eventually Maria had agreed to a brief phone interview. "Do you regret your decision to transport Tommy Martinez in your personal vehicle?" the reporter asked. "No," Maria said, "I don't regret saving a child's life." "But you lost your job." "Yes." "Was it worth it?" Maria thought about Tommy Martinez, probably asleep in a hospital bed at Children's Hospital, breathing easily for the first time in days. She thought about Diego Martinez, who could wake up tomorrow knowing his son was alive. "Yes," she said, "it was worth it." The story aired at 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. By midnight, Maria's phone was buzzing with friend requests on social media and messages from strangers. Some were supportive, calling her a hero, praising her courage, condemning the hospital for firing her. Others were critical, arguing that rules existed for good reasons and that she'd been reckless and irresponsible. Maria turned off her phone and went to bed, unemployed for the first time since she was 16 years old. She had no idea that her story was about to reach someone who could change everything. The call came at 3:47 p.m. on Saturday, exactly 24 hours and 30 minutes after Maria had been fired. She was sitting at her kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through job postings for nurses in nearby cities. Her savings account had enough money to cover rent and groceries for maybe 2 months if she was careful. After that, she'd have to move back home with her mother, and they'd both be squeezed into the trailer that barely had room for one person. The phone number on her caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code, but Maria didn't recognize it. She almost didn't answer. She'd been getting calls all day from reporters wanting follow-up interviews about her firing, and she was tired of explaining herself to strangers. But something made her pick up. "Is this Maria Santos?" The voice was professional, female, with the kind of crisp diction that suggested government work. "Yes, this is Maria." "Miss Santos, this is Jennifer Walsh from the White House Office of Presidential Personnel. Are you available to speak for a few minutes?" Maria blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say the White House?" "Yes, ma'am. President Biden would like to speak with you about your actions during the blackout Thursday night. Would you be available for a call in approximately 15 minutes? Maria's brain seemed to have stopped processing information normally. "The president wants to talk to me?" "Yes, ma'am. We've been following the news coverage of your situation, and the president was very impressed by your courage and dedication to patient care. Would 15 minutes work for you?" Maria looked around her tiny apartment as if the president might somehow be able to see through the phone. "Yes, 15 minutes is fine. Do I need to do anything special?" "Just be available to take the call. The president will be calling from his private line. Have a good afternoon, Miss Santos." The line went dead, leaving Maria staring at her phone in disbelief. She had 15 minutes to prepare for a conversation with the President of the United States. What did one wear for a phone call with the President? What did one say? She changed into her best blouse, not that it mattered for a phone call, and spent 10 minutes pacing around her apartment. She thought about calling her mother, but Elena Santos was probably at work, and besides, how do you tell your mother that the President is about to call? At exactly 4:02 p.m., her phone rang. "Miss Santos, this is Joe Biden." The voice was unmistakable. Maria had heard it in countless news broadcasts and speeches. But hearing it directed at her, saying her name, made the whole situation feel surreal. "Mr. President," she managed, "I thank you for calling. Maria, I want to talk to you about what you did Thursday night. I've been getting calls about your situation, and I have to tell you, what you did was extraordinary." "I just did what any nurse would do, sir." "No, Maria, that's not true. What you did took real courage. You put your career on the line to save a child's life when all the normal systems failed. That's the kind of heroism that makes America great." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes. After 48 hours of being criticized for breaking protocol, having someone, especially the president, validate her actions felt overwhelming. "Can you tell me about Tommy Martinez?" President Biden continued. "How's he doing?" "He's doing well, sir. I called the hospital this morning. He's stable and responding to treatment. The doctors expect him to make a full recovery." "That's wonderful. And his father?" "Diego Martinez. He's a veteran, actually. Served in Afghanistan. He works as a janitor now, raising Tommy on his own since his wife died." There was a pause on the line. "Maria, Diego Martinez wrote me a letter. Did you know that?" "No, sir." "He wrote to me about what you did. He told me how you risked everything to save his son when the hospitals couldn't help and the ambulances couldn't get through. He said you were his angel that night." Maria wiped her eyes, trying to keep her voice steady. "Tommy's a good kid. He deserves every chance to grow up healthy and happy." "Yes, he does, and thanks to you, he'll get that chance." President Biden's voice became more formal. "Maria, I'm calling to inform you that you're being awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's the highest civilian honor in our country, and you've earned it." Maria sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. She knew what it was. She'd seen it awarded to civil rights leaders, scientists, artists, people who'd changed the world, not unemployed nurses from trailer parks. "Sir, I don't think you understand. I was fired for what I did. I broke hospital policy. I'm facing an investigation by the nursing board." "Maria, let me tell you what I understand. I understand that when every system failed, when all the rules and protocols couldn't help a dying child, you stepped up. You risked your career, your reputation, everything you'd worked for to save a life. That's not just good nursing. That's heroism." "I don't feel like a hero, Mr. President. I feel like someone who's about to lose everything." "Well, that's going to change. The ceremony will be held at the White House next Friday. We'll fly you to Washington, put you up in a hotel, take care of everything." "And Maria?" "Yes, sir." "Bring Tommy Martinez and his father. I'd like to meet the young man you saved." After President Biden hung up, Maria sat in her kitchen for a long time staring at her phone. Outside her window, she could hear the ordinary sounds of Saturday afternoon: children playing, cars driving by, someone mowing their lawn. Normal life continuing while her own life had just taken a turn she never could have imagined. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. The White House had released a statement about her award, and within an hour, every major news network was trying to reach her. Her social media accounts exploded with messages from strangers around the world praising her courage and condemning the hospital that had fired her. By evening, the story had shifted completely. Where Friday's news coverage had focused on a nurse who'd violated hospital policy, Saturday's coverage focused on a hero who'd been wrongly punished for saving a life. Hospital administrators found themselves on the defensive, trying to explain why they'd fired someone who was about to receive the nation's highest civilian honor. Maria's phone rang again at 8 p.m. This time, it was Patricia Hoffman from the hospital. "Maria, I hope you're well. I'm calling to discuss your employment situation." "I thought my employment situation was pretty clear," Maria said. "I was fired yesterday." "Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. Given the recent developments with the presidential medal announcement, the hospital administration has been reconsidering. Are you offering me my job back?" "We'd like to discuss the possibility of reinstatement, perhaps with a commendation for your quick thinking during an emergency situation." Maria almost laughed. 24 hours ago, she'd been escorted out of the building by security. Now, suddenly, her quick thinking was worth a commendation. "Thank you for the call," Maria said, "but I'm not interested." "Maria, be reasonable. You need the job, and we're willing to overlook." "Overlook what? The fact that I saved a child's life? You know that's not what I meant." "Actually, I think that's exactly what you meant. Thank you for calling, Miss Hoffman, but I won't be coming back to Mercy General." Maria hung up and turned off her phone. She had a Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony to prepare for, and she was beginning to understand that her life was about to change in ways she'd never imagined. The White House was smaller than Maria had expected and larger than she'd imagined, both at the same time. Standing in the East Room on Friday morning, wearing a navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever owned, Maria felt simultaneously overwhelmed by the grandeur of her surroundings and humbled by the intimacy of the moment. Tommy Martinez stood beside her, wearing a crisp white shirt and tie that made him look older than his 8 years. His color was good, his breathing easy, and he kept staring around the room with the wide-eyed wonder of a child who'd somehow found himself inside a fairy tale. Diego Martinez, in a suit that had probably cost him a month's salary, hadn't stopped smiling since they'd arrived in Washington the day before. The ceremony was smaller than the grand affairs Maria had seen on television. Only about 50 people were present. White House staff, a few reporters, some of Tommy's doctors from Children's Hospital who'd flown in for the occasion, and Maria's mother, who'd taken her first day off from work in 3 years to watch her daughter receive the nation's highest civilian honor. Elena Santos sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, wearing the black dress she usually reserved for funerals and church services. When Maria had called to tell her about the award, Elena had been silent for so long that Maria thought the connection had been lost. Then she'd whispered, "Mia, I always knew you were special, but I never dreamed." President Biden entered the room with the kind of presence that Maria supposed came from decades in public service. He looked tired, the job aged everyone who held it, but his smile was genuine as he approached Maria and her guests. "Tommy," the president said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level, "how are you feeling?" "Good," Tommy said, suddenly shy in the presence of the most powerful person in the world. "The doctor said my lungs are working perfect now." "That's wonderful. And do you know why your lungs are working so well?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "Because Miss Maria drove me to the hospital when the lights went out." "That's right. Miss Maria is a very brave person. She risked a lot to make sure you got the help you needed." The president stood and turned to Diego. "Mr. Martinez, thank you for your service in Afghanistan. This country owes you a debt of gratitude." "Thank you, Mr. President, but today is about thanking Maria. She saved my son's life when nobody else could." President Biden nodded and moved to Elena Santos. "Mrs. Santos, you must be very proud of your daughter." Elena wiped her eyes and nodded. She always wanted to help people, even when she was little. She would bring home injured birds, stray cats, any creature that needed help. I just never imagined. "She gets it from you," the president said gently. "I can tell." The ceremony itself was surprisingly brief. President Biden spoke for about 10 minutes about the importance of courage in the face of adversity, about individuals who step up when systems fail, about the kind of quiet heroism that makes America strong. He told Tommy's story, how a citywide blackout had paralyzed the normal emergency response systems, how a young nurse had made a split-second decision to risk everything for a patient she barely knew. "Maria Santos represents the best of American healthcare workers," the president said. "When confronted with a choice between following protocol and saving a life, she chose to save the life. When faced with potential consequences for her actions, she accepted them willingly because she knew she'd done the right thing. That's the kind of moral courage we need more of in this world." When President Biden placed the Medal of Freedom around Maria's neck, the weight of it surprised her. It was heavier than she'd expected, substantial in a way that seemed to represent the gravity of the honor. The blue ribbon felt smooth against her skin, and the medallion itself, gold and enamel, beautifully crafted, caught the light from the East Room's chandeliers. "This medal represents the gratitude of a nation," President Biden said quietly, speaking just to Maria. "But more than that, it represents the lives you'll save in the future because of the courage you showed that night. Your story is going to inspire other healthcare workers to put patients first, even when it's difficult." The reception afterward was a blur of handshakes and congratulations. Maria met senators and cabinet members, doctors and nurses who'd traveled from around the country to witness the ceremony. Everyone wanted to hear the story firsthand, to understand what had driven her to make such a risky decision. But the conversation that meant the most to Maria happened in a quiet corner of the room, where she found herself talking with Dr. Sarah Chen, not her former supervisor, but a pediatric emergency physician from Seattle who'd been invited because of her work on emergency medical transport protocols. "I've been following your story," Dr. Chen said. "What you did has started important conversations in hospitals across the country about how we handle emergency situations when normal protocols don't apply." "I hope some good comes out of it," Maria said. "I'd hate to think Tommy and I went through all this for nothing." "Oh, trust me, good is already coming out of it. Hospitals are reviewing their emergency transport policies, looking for ways to maintain patient safety while allowing for flexibility during crisis situations. Insurance companies are being forced to consider coverage for emergency actions taken in good faith. You've changed things, Maria." That evening, Maria, Tommy, Diego, and Elena had dinner at a restaurant near their hotel. It was a nice place, the kind of restaurant Maria had always wanted to try but could never afford, and the White House had made the reservation and covered the bill. Tommy ordered chicken nuggets, proving that even after meeting the president, he was still 8 years old. "What happens now?" Diego asked as they shared dessert. "I don't know," Maria admitted. "I've gotten job offers from hospitals in 3 different states, but I haven't decided what I want to do yet." "You could do anything," Elena said. "With this medal, this recognition, you could work anywhere you want." Maria looked at Tommy, who was trying to build a tower out of sugar packets. She thought about all the children in hospitals across the country, all the families sitting in waiting rooms hoping for good news, all the healthcare workers making difficult decisions every day with limited resources and imperfect systems. "I think," she said slowly, "I want to do something that helps other people avoid the situation we went through, something that makes sure other kids like Tommy can get the care they need, even when everything goes wrong." She didn't know it yet, but that conversation would plant the seed for what would become her life's work. The idea came to Maria during the flight home from Washington. She was looking through the folder of congratulatory letters that had been forwarded to her through the White House, messages from nurses, doctors, paramedics, and ordinary citizens who'd been inspired by her story. One letter from a rural emergency room nurse in Montana particularly caught her attention. "Dear Miss Santos," it read, "I watched your medal ceremony on TV and cried through the whole thing. Last month, we had a similar situation. a child with appendicitis during a blizzard that knocked out power and made roads impassable. We almost lost him because we didn't have the right portable equipment to sustain him during transport to the regional hospital. Your story made me realize we need better emergency protocols and equipment for situations when everything goes wrong. Thank you for showing us that sometimes breaking the rules is the right thing to do. The letter was signed by Jennifer Walsh, RN, and included a P.S. If you ever want to help rural hospitals like ours, we could sure use someone with your courage and experience. Maria read the letter 3 times. By the time the plane landed, she had the beginnings of a plan. She spent the next 2 weeks researching rural hospitals, emergency transport systems, and the gaps in care that existed when normal infrastructure failed. What she found was sobering. Hundreds of small hospitals across the country lacked adequate emergency transport equipment, backup power systems, and protocols for handling critical patients during infrastructure failures. The turning point came when she received a call from Dr. Michael Torres, the emergency physician who'd treated Tommy at Children's Hospital. "Maria, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Diego Martinez." "Of course not, Dr. Torres. How can I help you?" "Actually, I was hoping I could help you. I've been thinking about your situation, about what happened that night, and I think there's an opportunity here to make some real changes." Dr. Torres explained that he'd been working with a consortium of pediatric hospitals to develop better emergency transport protocols for rural and underserved areas. They had funding, they had medical expertise, but they lacked someone with Maria's unique combination of frontline experience and national recognition to champion the cause. "We need someone who understands what it's like to be in an impossible situation and have to make a life or death decision with limited resources," he said. "Someone who's been there, who's made the hard choices. That's you, Maria." The offer was compelling. Maria would become the Director of Emergency Outreach for the Pediatric Emergency Transport Initiative, a new nonprofit organization focused on improving emergency care capabilities in underserved areas. The job would involve traveling to rural hospitals, assessing their emergency transport capabilities, and helping them develop protocols and acquire equipment for crisis situations. "It's not going to make you rich," Dr. Torres warned. "Nonprofit salaries aren't huge, but you'd be making a real difference, and you'd be using your experience to help other healthcare workers avoid the impossible situation you found yourself in." Maria thought about it for exactly 10 seconds before saying yes. The work was more challenging and more rewarding than anything she'd ever done. Over the next 6 months, Maria visited 47 hospitals in 12 states, from tiny critical access hospitals in rural Montana to understaffed emergency departments in inner-city Detroit. She met nurses and doctors who were dealing with the same resource constraints and impossible choices she'd faced, and she helped them develop solutions. In rural Wyoming, she helped a small hospital acquire portable emergency transport equipment that could sustain critical patients during long-distance transfers to regional medical centers. In urban Cleveland, she worked with an inner-city hospital to develop protocols for maintaining emergency services during power outages and infrastructure failures. But the most meaningful part of her work was the training she provided to frontline healthcare workers. Maria had become something of a legend in nursing circles, the nurse who'd risked everything to save a patient and been honored by the president for it. When she spoke at conferences and training sessions, people listened. "I'm not here to tell you to break protocol," she would say in her presentations. "I'm here to help you think about what you'll do when protocol isn't enough, when the systems we rely on fail, and when you have to make decisions that could save or cost lives." She told Tommy's story dozens of times, but she also collected and shared stories from other healthcare workers who'd faced similar situations. The nurse in Alaska who'd performed an emergency tracheotomy in a school gymnasium during a blizzard. The paramedic in Louisiana who delivered a baby in a boat during flooding when ambulances couldn't reach the patient. The doctor in California who treated wildfire victims in a hospital parking lot when the building had to be evacuated. These are the moments that define us as healthcare professionals, Maria would tell her audiences. Not the routine cases we handle according to protocol, but the extraordinary situations where we have to choose between the safe option and the right option. The Emergency Heroes Fund, as it came to be known, grew beyond Maria's initial vision. Donations poured in from across the country, some from wealthy benefactors, but many from ordinary people who sent $5 or $10 because they'd been inspired by Maria's story. Within a year, the fund had provided emergency transport equipment to 127 hospitals and trained over 800 healthcare workers in crisis response protocols. Maria still lived in the same small apartment, still drove a modest car, a reliable Toyota that had replaced her beloved but deceased Honda Civic, and still sent money home to her mother. But now she also traveled the country, spoke at medical conferences, and consulted with hospitals on emergency preparedness. She'd been profiled in nursing journals, featured on national news programs, and invited to testify before Congress about healthcare infrastructure and emergency preparedness. The most surprising development was the relationship that had grown between her and Diego Martinez. What had started as the shared trauma of that terrible night had evolved into something deeper. Diego had started attending her speaking events when she was in their city, bringing Tommy along when school schedules allowed. They'd had dinner together dozens of times, and somewhere along the way, the single father and the Medal of Freedom recipient had fallen in love. "You know," Diego said one evening as they walked through the park near Children's Hospital, "Tommy asked me if you were going to be his new mom." Maria stopped walking. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd have to ask you first." They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the same church where Elena Santos had prayed for her daughter during nursing school. Tommy served as ring bearer, wearing the same white shirt and tie he'd worn to the White House. President Biden sent a personal note of congratulations, but the most meaningful moment of the wedding came during the reception, when Dr. Sarah Chen from Seattle approached Maria with an envelope. "This is from the Pediatric Emergency Physicians Association," she said. "We wanted to do something to honor not just what you did that night, but what you've built since then." Inside the envelope was a check for $500,000, donated by pediatric emergency physicians from across the country to support the Emergency Heroes Fund. "We calculated how much we've all saved in malpractice insurance because of the protocols and training you've helped develop," Dr. Chen explained. "This is our way of saying thank you for making all of us better at what we do." 2 years after the night that changed everything, Maria stood in the emergency department of a new children's hospital in rural Montana, watching nurses train on the emergency transport system her fund had donated. The equipment was state-of-the-art. Portable monitors, ventilators, medication pumps, and communication devices that could maintain critical care during transport even when other infrastructure failed. Jennifer Walsh, the nurse whose letter had first inspired Maria to think about rural health care, was leading the training session. She'd become one of the Emergency Heroes Fund's most effective advocates, traveling to remote hospitals throughout the Mountain West to train staff on emergency protocols. "The key thing to remember," Jennifer was telling the group of nurses, "is that this equipment gives you options when normal systems fail. But the equipment is only as good as your willingness to use it when the situation demands action." Maria smiled at the familiar words. Jennifer had adapted Maria's philosophy about courage in crisis situations, but the core message remained the same. When systems fail, people must step up. Tommy Martinez, now 10 years old and healthy, sat in the corner of the conference room, working on homework while his stepmother conducted her business. He'd become something of a mascot for the Emergency Heroes Fund, appearing in promotional materials and sometimes speaking at events about his experience. The shy 8-year-old who'd been afraid to talk to the president had grown into a confident, articulate child who understood that his near-death experience had helped save other children's lives. "Mom," he said, looking up from his math worksheet, "can we visit the old hospital after this?" Maria and Diego had decided early in their relationship that Tommy would call her Mom. His birth mother would always hold a special place in his heart. But Maria was the mother who was raising him, who helped with homework and attended school events and worried about his future. "Which old hospital?" Maria asked, though she knew exactly which one he meant. "The one where you worked when you saved me, the one with the broken elevator." Mercy General Hospital had undergone significant changes since Maria's departure. The bad publicity from firing a future Medal of Freedom recipient had led to a complete overhaul of hospital administration. Dr. Chen had been promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine, and the hospital had implemented new protocols for emergency situations that balanced patient safety with flexibility during crisis situations. More importantly, they'd invited Maria to return, not as an employee but as a consultant to help them develop their emergency preparedness programs. It had taken Maria several months to agree to set foot in the building again, but she'd eventually decided that holding grudges wouldn't help future patients. "Sure," Maria said to Tommy, "we can visit Mercy General before we fly home." That afternoon, Maria, Diego, and Tommy walked through the emergency department where everything had started. The physical space looked the same, but the atmosphere was different. The new emergency transport protocols were posted prominently near the nurses' station, and Maria noticed several pieces of portable equipment that hadn't been available during her time there. Dr. Chen met them at the nurses' station, looking genuinely happy to see them. She'd become one of Maria's strongest supporters in the medical community, often speaking about the importance of empowering frontline healthcare workers to make difficult decisions in crisis situations. "How are the new protocols working?" Maria asked. "Brilliantly," Dr. Chen said. "We've had 3 situations in the past year where nurses have made transport decisions using personal vehicles during emergencies, a cardiac arrest during a traffic jam that blocked ambulances, a drowning victim during a flash flood, and a severe allergic reaction during a power outage. All 3 patients survived because our staff knew they had the authority to act when normal systems weren't available." They walked through the ER, and Maria was struck by how different everything felt. When she'd worked here, the emphasis had always been on following protocol, avoiding liability, and protecting the institution. Now the emphasis seemed to be on empowering staff to make good decisions in the best interests of patients. "There's something else," Dr. Chen said as they reached Trauma Bay 1, the room where Tommy had been treated on that night 2 years ago. "The hospital board wanted you to know that they're naming this room the Maria Santos Emergency Treatment Bay. There's going to be a plaque explaining how your courage that night led to improved emergency care protocols here and at hospitals across the country." Tommy looked around the room with interest. It was the first time he'd been back since that terrible night, and he'd been too sick then to remember much about the physical space. "This is where you were," Maria told him, "lying on that bed, fighting to breathe while I tried to figure out how to get you the help you needed." "Were you scared?" Tommy asked. Maria thought about it. "Terrified. I was terrified that I'd make the wrong decision and something would happen to you. But I was more terrified of not making any decision and losing you." "I'm glad you weren't too scared to help me." "Me too, buddy. Me too." As they left Mercy General, Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Walsh in Montana. "Training session went perfectly. The staff here is ready for anything now. Thanks for making this possible." Maria showed the message to Diego, who smiled and squeezed her hand. "Still feels good, doesn't it? Making a difference." "Better than good," Maria said. "It feels like everything that night, losing my job, the investigation, all of it, was worth it for this." They drove to the airport in comfortable silence, Tommy dozing in the back seat, Diego humming quietly to himself, and Maria thinking about the strange path that had brought her to this point. 2 years ago, she'd been a night shift nurse, living paycheck to paycheck, worried about her car breaking down and whether she could afford to send money home to her mother. Now she was married to a wonderful man, helping to raise a healthy, happy child, and running a nonprofit organization that was changing emergency healthcare across the country. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her assistant. Speaking request from Johns Hopkins Medical School. They want you to give the commencement address to their nursing graduates. Interested? Maria smiled. 6 months ago, she'd spoken at Harvard Medical School. Last month, it had been the Mayo Clinic. Next week, she was scheduled to testify before a congressional subcommittee about rural healthcare infrastructure. The shy nurse who'd once been afraid to speak up in staff meetings was now addressing auditoriums full of doctors and policymakers. But the most important speaking engagement was still the one that happened every few months, when she returned to nursing schools and emergency departments to tell Tommy's story and remind healthcare workers that their courage could change everything. Sometimes, she would tell them, the most important decision you'll ever make as a healthcare professional will be the one that feels most dangerous at the time. When you're faced with choosing between what's safe for you and what's right for your patient, choose what's right for your patient. The rest will work itself out. As their plane lifted off, Maria looked down at the city lights below. Somewhere down there, nurses and doctors and paramedics were working night shifts, making life-and-death decisions, caring for patients with limited resources and imperfect systems. Some of them would face impossible choices, moments when protocol and training weren't enough, when they'd have to decide between personal safety and patient welfare. Maria hoped that when those moments came, they'd remember her story. She hoped they'd remember that sometimes breaking the rules was the most ethical thing you could do. She hoped they'd have the courage to act when action was needed, even if it meant risking everything they'd worked for. Most of all, she hoped they'd remember that heroism wasn't about having special powers or extraordinary abilities. It was about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when those choices mattered most. Tommy woke up as the plane reached cruising altitude. "Mom," he said sleepily, "when I grow up, I want to help people like you do." "What kind of people do you want to help?" Maria asked. "Sick kids like I was, kids who need someone to be brave for them." Maria smiled and squeezed his hand. "I think that's a wonderful goal, Tommy. And if you work hard and never stop caring about helping others, I know you'll find a way to make it happen." Outside the airplane window, the lights of the city gave way to the darkness of rural areas where small hospitals were caring for patients with the emergency equipment and protocols that the Emergency Heroes Fund had provided. In those hospitals, nurses and doctors were better prepared for crisis situations because a young woman had once chosen to risk everything to save a child's life. The ripples from that single act of courage continued to spread, touching lives that Maria would never know about, saving patients she would never meet, inspiring healthcare workers to put compassion before caution when the situation demanded it. And somewhere in the darkness below, another nurse might be facing an impossible choice, weighing personal risk against patient welfare, wondering if she had the courage to do what needed to be done. If that moment came, Maria hoped her story would provide the inspiration needed to make the right choice. Because in the end, that's what heroism really was. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of fear when acting was the only option that could save a life. Tommy fell back asleep against her shoulder, breathing easily and peacefully, a living reminder that sometimes one person's courage really could change everything. Maria closed her eyes and settled back in her seat, grateful for the strange path that had brought her here and ready for whatever new challenges tomorrow might bring. After all, she'd learned that the most important moments in life were usually the ones you never saw coming, and the best way to prepare for them was to never stop believing that doing the right thing was always worth the risk.